September 1, 1943. Rabble Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai paused over the intelligence briefing, his one good eye, the other lost to American gunners the previous year, scanning details that made him chuckle in the humid operations tent. The Americans have produced a new fighter, bulky like a bomber, broad like a transport. They call it the Hellcat. Intelligence indicates it weighs twice as much as our Zero. Another American design blunder, he thought. Outside the tent flaps, his squadron's A6M Zero rested on the perforated steel planking, sleek, agile, lethal. For 2 years, these fighters had ruled the Pacific skies. British Hurricanes, American P-40s, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes all had fallen before the Zero's guns. This latest American attempt, the cumbersome Hellcat, would surely fare no better. What Sakai and all the Japanese naval aviators attending the morning briefing did not realize was that in just 30 days, this so-called failure would begin systematically dismantling Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would achieve a kill ratio of 19-1, destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft while losing only 270 in combat. It would redefine carrier warfare, crush Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign had rested on fatal miscalculations. The calculus of aerial dominance was about to be overturned by a plane that appeared awkward, flew heavily, and seemed to violate every principle the Japanese had mastered. Within 6 months, the very pilots now laughing at intelligence reports would be drafting farewell letters, aware that meeting Hellcats in the sky meant near certain death. Confidence in September 1943 did not stem from arrogance but from arithmetic. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved stunning victory ratios. At Pearl Harbor, 29 losses against 347 enemy planes destroyed. In the Philippines, 7 losses versus 103 destroyed. Over Darwin, 2 losses against 30. The British Far East Fleet's air arm annihilated, the Dutch East Indies Air Force wiped out in days. At the heart of this dominance was the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, a fighter that had rewritten aerial combat standards. When captured Zeros were tested by American engineers in 1942, they initially refused to believe the results. A fighter with the endurance of a bomber, the agility of a biplane, and the firepower to obliterate any opponent, it seemed impossible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishiwa, later Japan's top ace with 87 confirmed kills, wrote in his recovered diary, "Flying the Zero is like wearing wings." The aircraft obeys thought, not just control inputs. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy, built like automobiles, heavy and inefficient. The Zero's extraordinary performance relied on radical design choices. Extra superduralumin, a secret aluminum alloy, made the frame 30% lighter than comparable American aircraft. No armor shielded the pilot. Fuel tanks were not self-sealing. Even radios were often removed to save weight. Every ounce was sacrificed for maneuverability. Japanese intelligence initially received reports of the F6F Hellcat via neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications seemed either propaganda or deliberate deception. The Hellcat weighed 12,186 pounds fully loaded, compared to the Zero's 5,800. Its wingspan 334 square feet, powered by a draggy radial engine. It carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor plates, bulletproof glass, and self-sealing fuel tanks holding 250 gallons. Captain Minoru Genda, tactical mastermind of Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specs at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His archived analysis dismissed the fighter. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat is simply an extension of their failed philosophy, relying on machinery to make up for pilot skill. A Zero will circle it effortlessly. On paper, the numbers seem to back his judgment. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square feet gave it a turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a turning radius over 900 feet in a turning fight, the basis of all Japanese fighter tactics. The Hellcat would be helpless. The first glimpse, September 30, 1943. Marcus Island. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them. 6 dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His first thought recorded in his after-action report. B-25 bombers on a strange heading. Then they turned and he saw the distinctive silhouette, single engine, massive fuselage, wings that seemed too short for the body. First encounter with F6F fighter, he would write. Initial impression: Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber, engaged with standard tactics. Standard tactics meant using the Zero's superior turn rate to get on the enemy's tail. Fukuliai rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to curve onto its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The Hellcat didn't run. It didn't try to turn with him. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney or 28,000 double wasp engine producing 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakai's 1,130 horsepower, drove the Hellcat upward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, attempting to follow, watched his airspeed decay as the Zero struggled against gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for its weight. A hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 m, Fukui reported. 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui survived, barely making it back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer 2nd Esmaso, didn't return. Neither did the reconnaissance plane they were escorting. First blood to the Hellcat, the weight paradox. October 5, 1943. Task Force 14 struck Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another nuisance raid. American carriers had been launching these hit-and-run attacks for months, usually fleeing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This time would be different. We climbed to 20,000 feet, Shiga recorded in his diary. Below us, 12 F6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every advantage. Altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain. The engagement that followed shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters didn't scatter or attempt to turn. They maintained formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy high. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat's armor included 212 pounds of plate protecting the pilot, 110 pounds around the oil system, self-sealing tanks that could take dozens of hits. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in diving passes, the Hellcats executed their counterattack. Instead of turning to dogfight, they used their weight as a weapon. Climbing at full power, they reached altitude where the Zero's engine struggled for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,650 horsepower. The Zero was down to 900. They came down on us like hawks on sparrows, Shiga wrote. Their weight gave them speed we couldn't match. They would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react. 8 Zeros were shot down. No Hellcats were lost. The Marianas Turkey Shoot Prophecy. November 11, 1943. Rabble. The assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened as Lieutenant Commander Tao Tanamizu briefed them on American tactics. Tanamizu, with 32 victories, was one of the few pilots who had survived multiple encounters with Hellcats. Forget everything you know about air combat, he told them. The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors. Tanamizu explained what Japanese pilots were slowly, fatally learning. The Hellcat wasn't designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to. Using a combat doctrine called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy to kinetic energy and slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no chance to use their superior maneuverability. They work in pairs, Tanamizu continued, one high, one low. While you engage one, the other is already diving on you. Their radios, which we laughed at for adding weight, let them coordinate perfectly. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a machine. The Technology Gulf, December 1943. TR Lagoon. Commander Mitsuo Fuida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, now served as Air Operations Officer for the combined fleet. His inspection of damaged Zeros returning from encounters with Hellcats revealed the growing technology gap. The disparity in firepower was mathematical. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 machine guns fired 750 rounds per minute each, 4,500 rounds per minute total. Each 50 caliber bullet weighed 46 g and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering 3,500 FTLB of energy. The Zero's 27.7mm machine guns fired projectiles weighing 11 g at 2,300 foot-pers, 750 FTLB of energy. More disturbing were the reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots still relied on eyesight to spot enemies, Hellcat pilots were guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could see Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described his first radar-directed interception. "We were climbing through clouds when they hit us. No warning, no visual contact. Hellcats diving from above, exactly on our heading, perfectly positioned. They knew where we were, our altitude, our course. We were blind men fighting those who could see in the dark." The pilot equation. January 1944. The Japanese pilot crisis was becoming catastrophic. The pre-war Imperial Navy pilot training program had been the world's most demanding. Training took 3 years with pilots entering combat with 700 flight hours. Army pilots received 500 hours minimum. They were artists of aerial combat trained in aerobatics, gunnery, and the spiritual philosophy of air fighting. By early 1944, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with 300 hours of flight time, Army pilots with 200. Fuel shortages meant most training was done in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, instrument flight, radio procedures, all eliminated to rush pilots to the front. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with 300 hours minimum, including 50 hours in type. They had fired thousands of practice rounds, practiced carrier landings until they were automatic, learned energy tactics and safety over Texas airfields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasumagura Naval Air Station, wrote in his final report, "We are sending children to fight professionals." Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. "We have no ammunition for practice." He had never flown at night. "We have no fuel for such training." He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat. The Formosa Revelation, October 12 to 16, 1944. The Battle of Formosa. Vice Admiral Shagaru Fukuoka, commander of the 2nd Air Fleet, committed everything to stop the American carrier raids on Formosa. Over 700 aircraft, including the last trained pilots from the Homeland Training Squadrons. The Japanese claimed spectacular victory. 26 carriers and battleships sunk. 300 aircraft destroyed. The reality discovered only after pilots returned and gun camera footage was developed was catastrophic. Actual American losses, 89 aircraft. Japanese losses, 329 aircraft and almost every experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few surviving veterans, described the slaughter in his memoirs. The Hellcats were waiting at every altitude. As we climbed, they were above us. As we dove, they were below. They had divided the sky into grids, each section covered by a division. It was not combat. It was systematic extermination. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea. The Japanese Navy committed its reconstituted carrier force to Operation Ago. The decisive battle that would destroy American carrier power in the Pacific. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots. Against them, Task Force 58 with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, 450 of them F6F Hellcats. Admiral Jaburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 waves, confident that Japanese pilot skill and the Zero's range advantage would prevail. The first wave of 69 aircraft launched at 0830. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Hellcats were vetoed for interception with perfect positioning. Altitude advantage, sun at their backs, approaching from the Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Arb, leading the fighter escort, saw the Hellcats minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet, every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. Commander David Massell, CAG of Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft in that single day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, got 6. The Zeros tried to turn with us, Massell reported. We simply refused. We make a high side run, shoot one down, zoom climb back to altitude. They'd try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off. By day's end, the Japanese had lost 346 carrier aircraft, plus 50 land-based aircraft. American losses: 30 aircraft from all causes. American pilots in their ready rooms that evening coined the term turkey shoot. The enemy aircraft had been as helpless as game birds. The Lee Gulf record. October 24, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. Commander David McCampbell would set his single mission record during this battle. Leading 7 Hellcats from Essex, he intercepted a force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading for the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute battle, Massell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman, Roy Rushing, destroyed 6 more. I ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill, Massell recorded. The Hellcat excelled in every encounter. Not a single bullet struck my plane, even while outnumbered 8-1. This battle marked a decisive shift in aerial dominance. 7 Hellcats had overwhelmed 60 Japanese fighters, downing 15 without sustaining losses. McCampbell's 2 Ace-in-a-Day feats, 7 kills on June 19 and 9 on October 24, earned him both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. The psychological impact was profound. In the wake of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf engagements, surviving Japanese pilots developed what military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis. Admiral Ozawa noted in his after-action report, enemy radar-directed fighter coordination achieved what we once thought impossible: the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat functioned not as a lone fighter, but as part of a massive system. No matter their skill, our pilots were not facing individual aircraft, but an organized network. Pilot shortages worsened dramatically. By early 1945, training for Navy pilots was reduced to just 40 to 50 hours, Army pilots to 60 to 70, and kamikaze pilots received only 40 to 50 hours total, about a week's worth of instruction. During the Okinawa campaign, April to June 1945, Operation Iceberg, the Japanese launched 1,900 kamikaze missions against the American fleet. The Hellcat became both fighter and shield against these desperate attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, commanding his Hellcat division, shot down 23 enemy aircraft. His innovative tactics, using groups of 4 planes in coordinated sweeps, made conventional Japanese approaches suicidal. We called it the mowing machine, Valencia explained. For Hellcats flying line abreast, spaced 100 yards apart, would sweep enemy formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his sector. We make a pass, climb, and repeat. The numbers from Okinawa were staggering. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 kills against 249 losses, a 9.5 to 1 kill ratio. Even more crucially, they intercepted roughly 80% of kamikaze aircraft before reaching American ships. By 1945, the technological gap was insurmountable. The F6F Hellcat featured upgrades that made it even deadlier: water injection boosting engine power to 2,200 horsepower, zero-length rocket launchers, enhanced armor, and the K-14 computing gunsight for automatic deflection calculation. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 28 confirmed victories, though modern estimates suggest closer to 15, faced Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his vast experience, he nearly perished in the encounter. I performed every maneuver I had mastered: loops, rolls, splits, over 200 combat sorties worth, he wrote. Yet the Hellcat matched me effortlessly. I survived only because the American pilot made a mistake: he forgot to jettison his drop tank before the fight. The human cost accounting. By war's end, the F6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, lost 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, achieved a 19.3 to 1 kill ratio, produced 305 U.S. Navy aces, accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost for Japan was catastrophic. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had started the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945. The kamikaze equation. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite force to kamikaze operations represented the ultimate admission of the Hellcat's superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan turned its pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, justified it with stark mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, probability of success is near zero. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the Zero becomes a bomb, probability of hitting increases to 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death has meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishiwa escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F6F Hellcats in the process. The next day, October 26, 1944, Nishiwa died as a passenger aboard a transport shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's greatest ace, helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had briefly bested. The final testimony. August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast. At Atsugi Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, who had dismissed the Hellcat as weight over finesse, listened to the emperor's words. Around him sat the remnants of Japanese naval aviation. Teenage pilots with 40 hours of flight time. Aircraft cobbled together from spare parts, empty fuel tanks. That same day, Ian and Clarence Moore of VF-31 flying from USS Bellewood shot down a Yokosuka D-4 wide-duty dive bomber after 2:00 p.m., the last aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific Air War. The Occupation Revelation, September 1945, at Atsugi Airfield. The first American aircraft to land after the surrender were 12 F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway to see their tormentor up close. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Vasu, ace with 19 victories, demonstrated the Hellcat's capabilities to Japanese pilots. His casual aerobatics, loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart left them speechless. You have to understand, Vadu told them through an interpreter. This isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. The plane is stressed for 13 GS. I've never managed to break one. The engineering post-mortem. Japanese engineers studying captured Hellcats after the war discovered the true extent of American industrial superiority. The Pratt & Whitney R28,000 engine contained 2 84 precision machine parts, each interchangeable with any other R28,000 engine. The Nakajima Sakai required hand-fitting of components. No 2 engines were exactly alike. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat extensively after the war. His conclusion was devastating. We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age. The production miracle. Grumman's production of the Hellcat itself became a weapon. The Bethpage, New York factory operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company produced 12,275 Hellcats in 30 months, a feat the Japanese couldn't comprehend. In 1944, Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 fighters that year alone. The production system included innovations that seemed impossible to Japanese observers. Workers using color-coded instructions to assemble complex components. Shifts operating around the clock. Quality maintaining despite speed. The strategic revolution. The Hellcat didn't just win battles. It revolutionized naval warfare. Pre-war doctrine assumed carriers were vulnerable platforms that needed to strike first to survive. The Hellcat inverted this. Carriers became fortresses that could absorb and repel any air attack. Admiral Mark Mitchell, commander of Task Force 58, understood this transformation. With the Hellcat, we don't need to find them first. Let them come. The F6F will destroy them at our convenience. This confidence allowed unprecedented offensive operations. American carriers could park off enemy coastlines for weeks, their Hellcat umbrellas making them essentially invulnerable to air attack. The cultural collision. Beyond technology, the Hellcat represented a cultural philosophy that invalidated Japanese military doctrine. The samurai tradition emphasized individual excellence, spiritual strength, and acceptance of death. The Hellcat embodied systematic efficiency, material superiority, and preservation of life. This philosophical gulf meant Japanese pilots couldn't adapt to Hellcat tactics even when they understood them. The concept of refusing combat when disadvantaged, fundamental to Hellcat doctrine, was literally unthinkable to Japanese pilots trained in Bushido. The judgment of history. In 1962, the United States Navy held a symposium on Pacific War aviation. American and Japanese veterans gathered to discuss the conflict with historical perspective. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces with 34 victories, stated simply, "The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War. Period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made our victory inevitable." Commander Saburo Sakai responded, "The Zero was a superior fighter. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood the difference until too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost." The final judgment. The Hellcat's supremacy can be summarized with simple figures that convey a powerful truth. Overall kill ratio, 19-1, specifically against Zeros, 13-1. In just 30 months, Hellcats destroyed 12,275 enemy aircraft, while Zeros from 1943 to 1945 accounted for roughly 6,000. Over 5,000 American aviators trained on Hellcats, whereas by August 1945, fewer than 100 Japanese pilots remained combat-ready. Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at the Philippine Sea, offered perhaps the most candid assessment: "We mocked the Hellcat because we failed to grasp that it embodied not only an aircraft but an entire civilization's method of waging war." By the time that understanding arrived, our air forces had vanished. The final word. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai survived until 2000. When asked about the Hellcat in his last interview, he captured its total dominance perfectly. The Zero had made Japan a powerful naval force. The Hellcat revealed that Japan had never been as formidable as it believed. We imagined ourselves samurai. The Hellcat reminded us we were simply men with outdated tools confronting the future. Every Japanese pilot who survived did so only because a Hellcat pilot chose to spare them. That is the ultimate defeat, living at the mercy of your adversary. The F6F Hellcat entered service at double the Zero's weight, armored where the Zero was exposed, powered by engines the Japanese could not replicate, armed with unmatched weaponry, guided by radars they could not detect, flown by better trained pilots, and produced in numbers beyond comprehension. Japanese aviators had mocked it, unaware that every additional pound represented not vulnerability but the strength of an industrial democracy capable of safeguarding its soldiers. By the moment they realized the truth, their derision had turned to final letters home, their ridicule to kamikaze missions, and their confidence into total collapse. The Hellcat did more than defeat the Zeros, it obliterated an entire doctrine of warfare, proving that in modern conflict, the nation capable of producing the superior system would annihilate the one that relied solely on superior warriors. Japanese pilots had scoffed at the F6F Hellcat. In the end, the Hellcat had the final laugh. And it always would.